Thank you to my patrons. Your generosity and commitment to my work is astonishing. I sincerely appreciate it.
Do non-skiers have a word and come together and talk about the fact that they don't ski? I can't do that. I can't gather around and talk about how much everybody in the room doesn't believe in God. I don't have the energy for that.
And this, dear listener, is the primary reason why I've made this video and why I've featured Neil Degrasse Tyson in this episode of the most annoying non-religious people. How unbelievable is this? Let me tell you some home truths, Mr. Tyson. Let me break it down for you so that you can understand it.
If you ever try to bullshit me like that again, I will rip off your arms.
Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and don't worry, the video is about to begin. I just wanted to take a moment to make you aware of my Patreon, the link for which can be found in the description below. Sign up today for as little as £3 per month and you can gain access to a plethora of perks and extras, including downloadable audio-only and ad-free versions of my podcast that you can listen to on the go. You can also have your question answered in a monthly video, and better still, depending on which tier you choose, you could even sit down for a Skype call with yours truly, Magic Skeptic. All that is available and much, much more. All you got to do is click the link in the description below. I hope to see you there. Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and you're all most welcome to the next episode of the most annoying non-religious people. I must admit, guys, and I'm going to be 100% honest with you here, I've been finding this series very, very difficult to make. It's very, very difficult to be reflexive in one's thinking. It's very, very difficult to look at your own team and to have to point out the flaws and the fallacies. And so, look, I just want to be an open book. I'm always honest with you guys, and I have to admit that it has been difficult making this series. It won't come as any surprise to any of my long-term viewers and listeners, but obviously I've spent years on this channel at this point criticizing theism, criticizing the arguments for God's existence, discussing the negative utility that religion can have, and so forth. And, you know, I have made a few videos where I've talked about the positives of faith and so on, but let's be honest, the overall trajectory of this channel has been an anti-theistic one, if you will. And so I've been making this series because I think it is important to be reflexive, and it is important to reflect on one's own team and to hold atheists and agnostics and skeptics to a high standard. But yeah, I just wanted to admit that I'm finding this very difficult, and you might be wondering why I'm saying this now. Well, it's because, and as you'll have no doubt seen in the thumbnail, dear listener, today's guest gives me no pleasure to criticize. Today's target, if you will, gives me absolutely no pleasure at all. I'm not going to criticize the following video with any sense of glee or comfort or happiness or contentment. The truth is, it absolutely breaks my heart to have to criticize this person. I'm speaking, of course, about one Neil Degrasse Tyson, an amazing popularizer of science, an incredibly fascinating guy who's had a huge influence on me in my life. He's responsible in part for my love and adoration of science. And so, like I said, guys, it breaks my heart to have to look at Neil Degrasse Tyson in this episode. But if I'm being 100% honest, and if I'm being truthful, in my view, Neil Degrasse Tyson's commentary around atheism has been problematic at best. And, you know, I won't spoil the entire video right here. Suffice to say, it does break my heart to have to do this, but the truth is the truth, and Neil Degrasse Tyson deserves some criticism in terms of his commentary about atheism. I think he shows an arguable lack of insight when it comes to the plight of atheists and the movement more generally. So, look, we're just going to dive right into his comments here. You can be the judge, as always, dear listener. If you disagree with my criticism in this episode, the comment section is there for precisely that reason. You can dive into those comments and tell me why you think I'm wrong, if indeed you think I'm wrong. Alternatively, if you think I'm right, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below as well. But without further ado, let's jump into Mr. Tyson's comments about atheism and agnosticism and so forth. I dearly hope despite the fact that Neil Degrasse Tyson is arguably on our side as atheists and agnostics. I hope you enjoyed this video.
I'm often asked, and occasionally in an accusatory way, are you atheist? You know, the only ist I am is a scientist.
This opening is actually rather profound, but I've already got a problem here, dear listener, and I will be curious to hear whether or not you'll have the same problem. He speaks about the fact that people ask him, is he an atheist? And they ask it in an accusatory manner. And I have to hypothesize about why that might be. Could it be perhaps because atheists are distrusted? Could it be that the word atheist is a dirty word, particularly in the United States where he lives? I suspect so, and there is in fact data on this question, which I can put on the screen for you guys to have a look at. The point is, guys, atheists are a distrusted group in the United States, so it doesn't surprise me at all that people might approach someone like Neil Degrasse Tyson and say, are you an atheist? In a kind of a negative, accusatory manner. And that's a terrible thing. And Neil Degrasse Tyson seems to infer here that he finds it peculiar at the very least, or unpleasant, perhaps. But in my personal opinion, Neil Degrasse Tyson is partly responsible for this accusatory tone. He's partly responsible for the fact that people distrust atheists. I'm going to put a pin in that and I'll come back to it in a moment. Just keep that in mind for now. I do think that Neil Degrasse Tyson bears some responsibility in terms of the reputation of atheists and why people may not trust them or view them as sinister or malevolent in some way, shape, or form. But the second thing that's problematic in this opening statement is that he's dodging the question. When asked if he's an atheist, he says that the only ist I am is a scientist. Now, I appreciate his, poetic spirit there, and I appreciate the reformulation of the answer, and it's quite clever, admittedly. But clever though it might be, he's not answering the question. If I ask somebody if they're an atheist and they respond and say, the only ist I am is a scientist, you haven't really answered the question. The question is, Mr. Tyson, do you believe in God? If your response is to say, I'm a scientist, you have engaged in a non sequitur. This is a rather common problem in the rhetoric of one Neil Degrasse Tyson. He kind of essentially dodges this question unless his feet are really held to the fire. Other public speakers do this as well. And again, this further complicates the issue. And it, again, adds to the problem where atheists aren't trusted. But again, I'll get to that in a moment. For now, let's hear what he has to say next.
I don't associate with movements. I'm not an ism. I think for myself. The moment once someone attaches you to a philosophy or a movement, then they assign all the baggage and all the rest of the philosophy that goes with it to you. And when you want to have a conversation, they will assert that they already know everything important there is to know about you because of that association.
I don't necessarily disagree with Tyson here. It is true that when one admits that they are an ist of some description, that people are going to associate baggage with that. That's just what human beings do. But this is inescapable. This is just unavoidable. Even when one says that they are a scientist, are you telling me, Mr. Tyson, that there's not baggage associated with that? That people aren't going to have assumptions about you and your life and how you think about things and so forth? Baggage is just part of human nature. Human beings are imperfect, and while I agree that they shouldn't do this, that we should just treat people as individuals and work on a person-to-person basis, the truth is that's not the real world. The truth is that human beings are always going to associate things with you. They're going to associate things with you before you even open your mouth, right? We would rather not live in this world, but by virtue of the fact that you present as a male, people are going to have assumptions about you based on that. People might assume, for example, that you're straight, so-called heteronormativity, where people assume, for the most part, that the people they're speaking with in the world are heterosexual, right? And, I'm not a big fan of heteronormativity. We shouldn't go around and make these assumptions, but at least in the case of heterosexuality, the vast majority of the population is heterosexual, so it's not the most ridiculous or outlandish assumption that a person could make. But again, I would rather you treat people as individuals and not assume that unless you've asked someone. Fair enough. Fully in agreement with that progressive ideal right there. But are people going to assume for the most part that you're straight? I guess they just are. That's just human nature, right? The fact that you appear a certain way, people are going to assume things about your gender. The fact that you're a person of colour, Neil deGrasse Tyson, there are some unscrupulous, unpleasant people in the world who might assume things about you based on your skin colour. It is impossible to escape the fact that dull, idiotic human beings are going to associate things with you unfairly. That is just the nature of the beast. That is just the world we live in. People assume things about me based on the fact that I'm an atheist, but they also assume things about me based on the fact that I'm Irish. The amount of people whose jaw drops when I tell them that I don't drink alcohol. And I don't, dear listener, and it's not because I have a problem with alcohol. I've never had an issue with alcohol. I've never suffered from alcoholism or anything like that. I actually just don't enjoy it. I don't like the feeling of being drunk. I like having my wits about me. The feeling that other people describe when they get drunk, that feeling of merriment, I don't feel that feeling when I get drunk. And I have been drunk in the past, dear listener. The feeling I get is one of discomfort. I don't like when I feel that my thought patterns are being interrupted. I don't like when I can't correctly count the change that's in my hand and so forth. It's not for me, folks. I'm not big into alcohol. By the way, I'm not poo-pooing any of my listeners who do like a drink every now and then. I mean, whatever makes you happy, folks, have at it. I'm just telling you that I'm not interested, but you would be shocked and appalled by the number of people who react with complete incredulity when I tell them that I don't drink. In fact, some people have been so bold and brazen as to respond by saying, "But you're Irish." Right? How stereotypical and unpleasant is that, right? They're just painting me with an Irish alcoholism stereotype. And to be honest, it doesn't come between me and my night's sleep. I'm not grossly offended by it or anything, but it's almost certainly insensitive. And again, it's just because I open my mouth and I speak and they hear the Irish accent. And so if I tell them that I don't drink, they're shocked and appalled. The truth is, Mr. Tyson, it's impossible to escape people associating baggage with you. You failing to admit or refusing to admit, as I would probably say, that you're an atheist or an agnostic, or trying to dance around that question, isn't going to help at all. And in fact, by even refusing to answer the question, people are going to associate baggage with that as well. If you dodge a person's question, now you're a question dodger, and people are going to assume things about you on the basis of that dodge. They might assume that you're dishonest. They might assume that you've got some kind of a sinister agenda, right? They might assume that you're secretive or something of that nature. In my humble opinion, it is impossible to escape the fact that human beings, and the evolved primates that we are, it's impossible to escape tribalism. People are going to try and fit you into categories, and they're going to associate baggage with those categories. It is impossible. Before you've even opened your mouth, people have probably classified you in several ways, and then as soon as you say your first sentence, they're going to classify you even further, depending on your accent, depending on your ethnicity, depending on what you say, depending on how you say it, and so forth. If you even mispronounce a word, people might associate certain baggage with you. They might assume that you're uneducated or that you're lower class or something ridiculous like that. People are just going to make assumptions. So you not answering this question or trying to dance around it, Mr. Tyson, doesn't escape that problem. You cannot escape this problem. It's inescapable. So please, 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 for me, as an atheist, when people ask you whether or not you believe in God, could you just be honest and tell them what you believe or don't believe? Because you cannot escape the problem you've just described. Anyway, let's move on.
And that's not the way to have a conversation. I'm sorry, it's not. I'd rather we explore each other's ideas in real time, rather than assign a label to it and assert you know what's going to happen in advance.
But with respect, Mr. Tyson, isn't that exactly what the person is doing when they ask you, are you an atheist? I mean, really and truly what that translates to is, do you believe in God? That is an example of a person having a conversation with you as an individual in real time.
I'd rather we explore each other's ideas in real time.
Is it not? And your refusal to answer the question, or you dancing around it, is you refusing to partake in that which you claim is the right thing to do, which is to have a conversation with individuals in real time and learn about what each person believes. If I meet you in public, or if I have a conversation with you over the phone and I say, hey, Neil, do you believe in God? Are you an atheist? And then you respond and say, the only ist I am is a scientist.
The only ist I am is a scientist.
I mean, all I'm really learning about you in real time there is that you're not willing to answer my question. And again, I'm going to associate baggage with that, a la my previous point. But I feel like he's talking out both sides of his mouth here. Again, this dance is continuing. If a person asks you, are you an atheist? Fair enough. Maybe you don't want to accept the label. Maybe that label doesn't work for you. You could, however, respond and clarify by saying, are you asking me, do I believe in God? And I would imagine the person would respond and say, yes, that's exactly what I'm asking you. And then you could respond and say, well, yeah, truth be told, I don't believe in God, which is evidently the case. And we're going to get to that in a moment, dear listener. But yeah, I mean, I feel like he's just trying to dodge the question. He doesn't want to talk about it because he's worried about the baggage. But as I've already said, you can't escape the baggage. And if somebody is asking you, Mr. Tyson, whether or not you believe in God, they're doing exactly what you require of people, which is to have a conversation in real time. So I'm not really sure what the problem is here. Do you want to hypothesize, dear listener? Because it seems to me like he's just uncomfortable with admitting that he doesn't believe in God. And I suspect that there are political reasons for that. I don't want to push this too far because I'm firmly in, conjecture territory here. But I suspect that he doesn't want to say that he's an atheist because he worries that it might divide his audience. It might, reduce his book sales or something of that nature. Now, again, I'm firmly in conjecture territory there, so I'm not asserting that as fact. I am hypothesizing, and I'm purely engaging in speculation here. But one does wonder why he wouldn't just admit that he's an atheist or that he doesn't believe in God. I mean, no doubt it's bad for business to admit that you're an atheist in the United States, given the fact that the United States is quite a religious place. So perhaps it's just a smart business strategy. Maybe I should be commending him here. But it doesn't do any favors for the atheist, agnostic, or skeptic movement. But again, I'll get to that momentarily, dear listener. Let's listen to the rest of the video, or the next bit at least, before we make any further judgments.
So what people are really after is, what is my stance on religion or spirituality or God?
Bingo.
And I would say if I'd find a word that came closest, it would be agnostic. Agnostic, a word dates from the 19th century. Huxley. To refer to someone who doesn't know, but hasn't yet really seen evidence for it, but is prepared to embrace the evidence if it's there, but if it's not, it won't be forced to have to think something that is not otherwise supported. Okay? There are many atheists who say, well, all agnostics are atheists. Like, okay.
What I wouldn't necessarily say that all agnostics are atheists. What I will say is that it does come down to definitions. And I am quite persuaded by the definition of atheism, which merely says that atheists are people who do not have an active belief in God. And that does subsume agnosticism, in my view. Agnostics, by saying, I don't know whether there's a God or not, are admitting to the fact that they don't currently have an active belief in God. They don't currently live their life as though a God exists. They don't pray, they don't attend church, and so forth. So yeah, in my view, agnostics are atheists, or at the very least, they're non-theists. They're people who do not have an active belief in a God and they don't practice a religion. So yeah, I mean, that's my take on it. But I understand, dear listener, that people use words differently. Some people define atheists as people who have an active non-belief in God, people who believe the claim there are no gods, which is quite a different thing from simply saying that you are unconvinced about the existence of a God. If that distinction is a bit strange, dear listener, if that confuses you, just reflect on the difference between not guilty and innocent. Remember, not guilty doesn't mean that you're innocent. Not guilty just means that there wasn't enough evidence to determine guilt. You might very well have committed the crime, it's just that there wasn't enough evidence to find you guilty. That's why we only determine guilt in a court of law. It might in fact be impossible to prove innocence, because you're trying to prove that somebody did not do something, which is an attempt to prove a negative. A notoriously difficult thing to do, by the way. I mean, imagine if I tried to prove that there aren't any leprechauns. Now, you might say that would be trivially easy to prove, but just reflect on the philosophy of that, dear listener. How would I actually go about proving that there are no leprechauns? I would have to search everywhere in the universe, everywhere, right? Behind every rock, under every crevice, right? I would have to search absolutely everywhere and not have found a leprechaun. That's assuming I had access to everywhere. I would have to reach the furthest edge of the universe and have checked there as well, because maybe there's a leprechaun out somewhere in deep space, right? So I'd have to search absolutely everywhere and not have found a leprechaun. But even then, I wouldn't have satisfied the case fully, because when I was looking over here, maybe the leprechaun was hiding over there. When I was looking over there, maybe the leprechaun was hiding over here, and so forth. And that's before we add anything else to the description of leprechauns. Maybe leprechauns can go invisible, and now it becomes even more impossible still, right? So can I really prove that there are no leprechauns? Suffice to say, philosophically speaking, I think it's quite an indefensible position to say that one can prove the non-existence of leprechauns. If you apply this to God, it becomes even more difficult, because God is the kind of entity, according to those who believe in him, who can be invisible, who's intangible, who's metaphysical, who's non-physical. So how can we prove the non-existence of God? I don't know, folks. I wouldn't care to try and prove it. That's why I would never claim that there are no gods. I merely say that I am unconvinced about the claim that God does exist. And so under some descriptions, that makes me an agnostic. Under other descriptions, that makes me an atheist. I don't care what word you want to use. All that matters to me is that you understand that I am merely unconvinced in the existence of God. Using the courtroom analogy, I'm essentially finding God not guilty of existing. I'm not finding God innocent of existence, because, again, it's very difficult to prove a negative. I'm merely finding God not guilty of existence. The only reason I bring all of this up is to just clarify usages and explain why I would describe Neil Degrasse Tyson as an atheist. He's saying that he's an agnostic, but in so doing, he's admitting that he doesn't have an active belief in a God. That, under my usage, makes him an atheist. If you're using another usage, that means he's an agnostic. That's fine. But the real problem here is when Neil Degrasse Tyson starts talking more specifically about atheism and why people feel the need to align themselves with that movement. So, without further ado, let's move on to his next comment, folks, and let's see what you think.
I'm constantly claimed by atheists. I find this intriguing. In fact, on my wiki page, I didn't create the wiki page, others did, and I'm flattered that people cared enough about my life to assemble it. And it said, Neil Degrasse Tyson is an atheist. I said, well, that's not really true. I said, Neil Degrasse Tyson is an agnostic. Went back a week later, it said Neil Tyson's an atheist again, within a week.
So Tyson here is revealing that he has a particular definition of atheism in mind. He just said there that he's not an atheist, that's not correct.
And it said, Neil Degrasse Tyson is an atheist. I said, well, that's not really true.
Which means that he's probably defining atheist in the classical philosophical manner, which is to say that he's defining an atheist as someone who claims that there are no gods. Somebody who takes on the positive case that there are no gods. Now, under that definition of atheism, I'm probably not an atheist either. I do vacillate back and forth, but given my previous point and how difficult it is to prove a negative, I find it very difficult to defend, philosophically speaking. It's very difficult to defend the hard case of there are no gods. Again, I'm not aware of a mechanism. I don't know how one would verify the non-existence of an entity that has so much in common with the concept of nothingness. Right? Nothingness is spaceless. Nothingness is timeless. It's immaterial. It's non-physical. Exactly the same as God. God is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, metaphysical, non-physical, intangible, can't be touched, tasted, smelled, quantified in any way. How would one possibly go about verifying the non-existence of such an entity? And so, yeah, I find it very difficult to defend the hard atheist case of there are no gods. And it seems like Tyson has this definition of atheism in mind when he resists the label. He says, no, I'm not. When he sees it on that wiki page, I'm not an atheist. That doesn't really fit my description. And so I just wanted to make it clear here that I think it's obvious right now at this point in the video what definition of atheism he has in mind, which perhaps does add some clarity as to why he would reject the label in the first place. But that's not the biggest problem here, folks. The biggest problem is coming next. Have a listen.
And I said, all right, now I have to word it a little differently. So I said, okay, Neil Degrasse Tyson, widely claimed by atheists, is actually an agnostic. And some will say, well, you're not being fair to the fact that they're actually the same thing. No, they're not the same thing, and I'll tell you why. Atheists I know who proudly wear the badge are active atheists. They're like in-your-face atheists, and they want to change policies, and they're having debates. I don't have the time, the interest, the energy to do any of that.
Listen to what he just said. Not only is he assuming that atheists are people who actively claim that there is no God, but he's assuming that the label of atheist comes with behavioral commitments.
And they want to change policies, and they're having debates.
This is nonsense, folks. And this is where Neil Degrasse Tyson reveals his arguably philosophical ignorance. Atheism is merely a label that is attached to you based on what you believe. Now, again, it depends on which version of atheist you're using as a label, but let's just run with his definition. If the label atheist means that someone has the active belief that there are no gods, that doesn't necessarily come coupled with activism. That doesn't necessarily come coupled with attendance at atheistic debates and the promotion of the atheist worldview. Why in the hell would you assume that? I mean, can't somebody be a theist without going out and promoting the existence of God? Can't somebody be a theist without being evangelical? Why would you couple atheism with these behavioral commitments? This is a really bizarre way of talking about atheism. He seems to think that atheists are not only people who claim that there are no gods, but they're people who go out and actively campaign for that idea. They're people who attend debates and who vociferously go out and spread the ideas. In other words, he views the label of atheist as having a kind of evangelical bent to it, that one isn't really an atheist unless they're out there promoting the idea, and he doesn't have time for that, so I guess he can't accept that label. This is absolutely ridiculous. Right? I mean, can't somebody identify as having a particular belief without being evangelical? A person could be a vegetarian without going out there and attending protests and trying to change the world. They might have just made a personal decision not to eat any more meat. A person can be religious, a person can be Christian, and they might not even go to church. All they do, perhaps, is just have a silent belief in the existence of God, and they think that Jesus is his son and so forth. They might not even pray before they go to bed. One could examine their life under a microscope and find no evidence at all of their religious commitment. It might just be an internal psychological state of mind where they believe that Christ is God's only begotten son. It might not have any impact on their behavior whatsoever. There are lots of people who fit this pattern, folks. Lots of people who believe something silently, but you'd never know it unless they told you. But Tyson here seems to be assuming that a real atheist is a person who goes out and campaigns. A real atheist is a person who's evangelical. I just don't understand this. This is just a gargantuan error, and I just don't know how he got here. In my view, this is arguably insincere, folks. I think the reason he's defining atheist in this extravagant manner is so that he doesn't have to admit that he is one.
And some will say, well, you're not being fair to the fact that they're actually the same thing. No, they're not the same thing, and I'll tell you why.
Now, again, I'm firmly in the conjecture territory there again, folks, but Neil Degrasse Tyson is an incredibly intelligent guy. I can't sincerely believe that he thinks that to be an atheist, one has to be out there campaigning and one has to be evangelical. I can't take seriously that he really believes that's a requirement of being an atheist. That just makes no sense at all. He's way too smart to sincerely believe that. It seems to me that this is just a ploy so that he can say, well, look, see, I'm not an atheist, because atheist is defined as people who go out there and campaign on the question, people who are evangelical who go out there to try and change people's minds and get them to lose their faith and so on. And, I don't do that, so I'm definitely not an atheist. I'm not an atheist, folks. This is really, really bizarre. Now, again, I'm making clear that that's conjecture. It's a hypothesis. I'm not saying that I know this to be true. I'm merely hypothesizing and speculating here. I'm not going to die on that hill. I'm not, defending that till the day I die. I'm just hypothesizing about why he would say this, because there's no way that he sincerely believes this. It's just way too idiotic a position for him to believe that is how atheist is best described, or how atheism is best defined. I can't take that seriously. But look, let me know what you think, dear listener. Jump into the comments below, and why don't you give me your hypothesis as to why Neil Degrasse Tyson would define atheism in such an extravagant manner. But for now, let's move on to the next problematic statement.
I'm a scientist. I'm an educator. My goal is to get people thinking straight in the first place. Just get you to be curious about the natural world. That's what I'm about. I'm not about any of the rest of this. And it's odd that the word atheist even exists. I don't play golf. Is there a word for non-golf players? Do non-golf players gather and strategize? Do non-skiers have a word and come together and talk about the fact that they don't ski? I can't do that. I can't gather around and talk about how much everybody in the room doesn't believe in God. I don't have the energy for that.
And this, dear listener, is the primary reason why I've made this video and why I've featured Neil Degrasse Tyson in this episode of the most annoying non-religious people. How unbelievable is this? Let me tell you some home truths, Mr. Tyson. Let me break it down for you so that you can understand it. If people in the world were being immiserated in the name of skiers, then you might be tempted, or at least if you were moral, you might be tempted to join the non-skiers club. I know I would be. I would join the non-skiers club if skiers were immiserating people in the world. If homosexuals were being immiserated and made feel guilty about their nature as a consequence of the behaviours and the hegemony of skiers, then I would join the non-skiers club. If children were being indoctrinated and being taught anti-scientific ideas, something which you care about a great deal, Mr. Tyson, if skiers were responsible for that, if skiers were responsible for the indoctrination of children and the promotion of anti-scientific nonsense, well then I, Mr. Tyson, would be willing to join the non-skiers club. If skiers flew planes into buildings and blew themselves up and were involved in terrorist incidents all around the world as a consequence of their belief in skiing, then, Mr. Tyson, I would join the non-skiers club. If skiers were responsible for the spread of HIV and the worsening poverty in the continent of Africa because they have a problem with contraception, right? Imagine that. Imagine if skiers were promoting the non-usage of contraception in a continent ravaged by HIV in certain parts, in a continent that's ravaged by poverty in certain parts and could well do with a reduction in the birth rate. If skiers were promoting the non-usage of contraception, then I might be tempted to join the non-skiers club. Is this starting to land for you, Mr. Tyson? Do you really not get it? Do you really not understand? How dare you? How dare you trivialize the atheist movement? How dare you describe it in such dismissive and trivial terms? How can you do this? Do you have any compassion for your fellow human beings? Do you care at all? The audacity of you to describe atheists as just a bunch of people who stand around agreeing on how much they disbelieve in the existence of God. Do you really think that's the beginning and end of the atheist community? Because if that's your view, Mr. Tyson, you don't have the first clue about what atheism is and why it's important. You appear to be completely oblivious about what's going on in the world around you, particularly in the United States, where evangelical Christianity and the Christian right is out on force. People's rights are being stripped away because of the activities of those who believe in God. And you wonder why people have the energy to join the atheist community?
I don't have the energy for that.
You wonder why people like me care and why I might be willing to attend a conference where I'm going to stand around with like-minded individuals who also don't believe in God?
I can't do that. I can't gather around and talk about how much everybody in the room doesn't believe in God.
And you trivialize it with reference to there's no non-skiers club.
Do non-skiers have a word and come together and talk about the fact that they don't ski?
Give me a fucking break. This is obscene. I think what he said here shows a remarkable lack of understanding. It shows a remarkable lack of compassion for the LGBTQ plus community, for women, for children, and even for people who are interested in the scientific truth. You live in a country, Mr. Tyson, where there are religious people who are agitating in favor of having creationism taught in the science classroom. You yourself identify as a scientist and an educator. Don't you care? And you wonder why people might be tempted to join the atheist or skeptic movement? This, guys, I'm afraid to say, is absolutely disgusting. And it breaks my heart to have to say this stuff because I really love Neil Degrasse Tyson. I really love Neil Degrasse Tyson. I think he's awesome. I have spent hours, I have spent months, I've spent years digesting his content and going down YouTube rabbit holes where he has regaled me with amazing scientific wisdom. He's awesome. And he's got an amazing platform, and he's using it, folks, to denigrate the atheist community, and it breaks my heart.
Is there a word for non-golf players? Do non-golf players gather and strategize?
Tyson, we need you on our side. You joked earlier about how the atheist community keeps trying to claim you.
I'm constantly claimed by atheists. I find this intriguing.
Well, it's because you're an agnostic, and under certain definitions of atheism, you fit. You don't currently have an active belief in God, but you seriously need to update your thinking here. The atheist community needs allies, Mr. Tyson. And your platform and your charisma and your intelligence would be amazing tools. No, we're not asking you to go to atheist conferences and stand up and say that there isn't a God. We're not asking you to go out and have debates with theists and spend your time on that. I get that you're busy, no doubt. Nobody's asking you to do that. But please, and this has no energy cost in you whatsoever, please stop trivializing the atheist movement.
Do non-skiers have a word and come together and talk about the fact that they don't ski?
Don't you dare ever again describe the atheist movement as just a bunch of people gathered in a room who were in violent agreement about God's non-existence. It's much bigger than that, Mr. Tyson. Atheists need your help. They don't need you to pile on like other people do in the theistic community and trivialize atheists as non-stamp collectors or non-skiers. Oh boy. I don't think there's anything else I can say on this matter, dear listener. Let's listen to his final comments and let's wrap this up. It's just so depressing to have to listen to somebody I respect so much utter such nonsense. But let's move on.
And so agnostic separates me from the conduct of atheists, whether or not there's strong overlap between the two categories. And at the end of the day, I'd rather not be any category at all.
And at the end of the day, he'd rather an impossibility. It's not possible to escape categorization. It's not possible to escape baggage. But I won't recapitulate the entire point I made in the earlier portion of the video. Oh man, as I said at the start, this video series breaks my heart. It's really, really hard to sit here and make this video where I critique a hero of mine, frankly speaking. I hope you'll see this one day, Mr. Tyson, and if you do, I hope you'll update your rhetoric and change your mind, and I hope you won't be so willing to besmirch the atheist community. I hope that I'm just subject to a misunderstanding. Perhaps you meant something else and I've got the wrong end of the stick here. And, you know, if that's the case, dear listener, if you think I've misunderstood him, jump into the comments below, because nobody at this point would appreciate a revelation like that. Nobody would appreciate that more than me. I would love to believe that I've simply misunderstood him. I would love to believe that, because if indeed I've understood him correctly, these comments are deeply, deeply depressing. But on that note, folks, sorrowful though it is, I'll have to leave it there. If you liked this video, please do drop a like in it, folks. That helps out the channel enormously. It doesn't cost you anything, but it tells the algorithm to share this video and to show it to others, and that helps the channel grow. So I'd really, really appreciate it if you could do that. Other than that, you know, if you are willing and able, I would sincerely appreciate you becoming a patron today. And if you want to become a patron, you can click the link in the description box below. That will bring you to my Patreon page, where you can sign up for as little as £3 per month. And for that £3, you'll gain access to a plethora of perks, bonuses, and extras. And the last thing I want to say, guys, is, again, don't forget about the comment section below. If you agree with my criticisms here, jump into the comments section below and let me know why. If you disagree with my criticisms, I'd be even more interested in hearing from you. If I got it wrong, if you think I've misunderstood Mr. Tyson, or even if you think that I'm right but that I could have done a better job at my critique, constructive criticism is always welcome, and any long-term viewer or listener who's commented below critiquing me will tell you that. I mean, it doesn't mean that we'll necessarily agree. I will push back, I will test your ideas, but if indeed I'm wrong, ultimately I hope at this point I've demonstrated in my YouTube career that I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong. And in closing, folks, thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. All the best. Bye bye.